Think of a game where just moving your character around feels nice, not even jumping or shooting or swinging a sword, just moving. How did that character move? Was he slippery, fast, sluggish, floaty? Introducing Attack, Decay, Sustain, Release. ADSR envelopes are a visual representation of how that character moved, how the game responded to your input. ADSR is a term usually reserved for musical instruments. Plucking a string on a guitar will make a loud noise, which takes a very brief time to go from 0 to 100, the attack. The note then decays before reaching a point where it's stationary, a sustained note. Eventually, it'll begin to die off to nothing, the release. Where these are far less often applied, but just as relevant as in video games. If we map Mario's movement in the original Super Mario Bros. Onto this graph, we have the attack phase as he speeds up, the sustain as he maintains a constant speed, and the release as he slides around for a moment after the button is released. There's no decay, as this would mean Mario would burst off the starting line before slowing back down a little, making precise movements unnecessarily difficult. As the case may be, very few games do have decay phases, so for our purposes here, let's limit these to just the A, S, and R. Changing the attack and release phases can have a massive impact on how a game feels to play. Have a graph which looks like this, with a short attack and release, and your control will be very responsive, like Shovel Knight or the later Mega Mans. Have one that looks like this, with a long attack and decay, and your control will feel floaty, like Asteroids or N++. These longer tails will generally have a curve to them, but for the sake of clarity and to avoid abstraction, we'll keep it to straight lines. Do this or this with a long attack and a short decay, and the player will be compensating in one direction far more than the other. Think of any platformer where you constantly feel like you overshoot your jumps and have to adjust in the opposite direction before landing. Take these to the extreme and you have a game where it takes 10 seconds to accelerate to max speed, but you stop on a dime. I can't think of any examples, perhaps for good reason. One particular case of bad game feel that's eluded myself and others for years now is exactly why the first Crash Bandicoot feels so unpleasant to control. I think I took a fair stab at it, but I was never totally satisfied, so we're going to revisit the series and take a look at the ASR envelopes of Crash 1 and the much improved Crash 2, and see how the recent trilogy remake stacks up while we're at it. In the original version of Crash 1, Crash's ASR envelope looks like this. A lot like the one we looked at for Super Mario Bros. A moment ago. He has a quick but noticeable attack phase. He doesn't start running at full speed the moment the directional pad is pressed. The sustain, at least in platformers, is generally a flat line, representing how long the player keeps the direction pressed. The release is also smooth but noticeable. Again, Crash takes a moment to slow down to a standstill. This is very similar to how Mario moves in the 2D games, but Mario usually has fairly large platforms to land on. Some of the ones Crash has to deal with are more comparable to Lost levels. Keep that in mind. Still, Crash's momentum initially seems as though it would be intuitive. Objects don't start and stop on a dime in real life either, but we're not talking real life here, are we? In Crash 2, the ASR envelope looks like this. Crash hits full speed almost instantly when the directional button is pressed, and stops, as far as I can tell, immediately when it's released. This makes Crash feel tight and precise, but also conflicts with our innate understanding of how objects move, which is perhaps why Crash 3's envelope looks like this. The attack is the same, but the release has been increased back to being substantial enough to influence movement and gameplay. It's nowhere near as slippery as Crash 1, but there's definitely an increased sense of conservation of momentum to Crash's movements thanks to the change. Question is, which of these implementations is actually better? Which game has the best game feel? The answer, cop-out as it is that there is no right answer. In fact, there's never a right and wrong answer for game feel in a vacuum. I'd like to think every ASR envelope you can possibly imagine is good for something. It's when you start to marry game feel with a specific game design that things become a bit more measurable. Mega Man requires tight jumps on fairly small platforms, so it makes sense that he would have zero release phase. He'll fall straight down the moment you release the D-pad. This is why Mega Man 1 feels imprecise. Back then he still carried some momentum in his movements. At the same time though, Downwell also requires landing on very small objects, but the boy has an evident release phase and momentum to his movements. Which is better? Summarised like that, it's impossible to say. But when we start to consider more aspects of the game design, it becomes clear why these games feel different. In Downwell, the width of the screen is the entire range of lateral movement. As important as they are, left and right movements are very constrained. Downwell is about management of momentum, vertically for the most part with the gun boots, but it's also about precise landings and spatial awareness. In Mega Man, the test is usually not in the landing itself, it's in seeing if you can navigate obstacles. It's not, can I land on this platform, it's, can I get myself to that platform without something going wrong on the way. The landing itself is not meant to be the hard part, which is in fact the complete reverse of Downwell. Given their respective game designs, Downwell and classic Mega Man, both 2D platformers with tricky movements but with very different control feel, both still have excellent feel for what they set out to do. This is where Crash comes in. We've seen how these original 3 games felt to control, but the true test is in the suitability of those controls for the tasks you're given in the games. I think to make this call, I'll only need to point out 2 things, the bridge levels and crates. The infamous bridge levels in Crash 1, especially the second one, have incredibly tight jumps to make. These singular planks are only a little bigger than Crash's model in vertical length. The crates are only slightly bigger than that, still very small targets when bouncing off them over a bottomless pit. Given how many comments I got asking why I didn't mention the gems in the original Crash videos, I'll assume smashing all the crates is something a lot of people do set out to do. I'd wager all these people will be able to sympathise with over or undershooting a crate because of the finagling Crash needs to land on such a precise target. This isn't helped by the unbearably long animation Crash plays if you try to turn around in midair. I've been over this before, so the point is that all 3 of these games require precise landings which the controls in the first game make very difficult. This is not an invalid way of presenting challenge, a sheer test of the player's dexterity and ability to compensate. This is half the fun of N++ after all, since the attack and release phases are over-exaggerated. Regardless of whether doing this with your game feel is a good idea or not, it does explain why the controls feel unintuitive, as though they are to blame for all those missed jumps. In reality, you're to blame for failing to compensate for the specific feel the developers have gone for. Whether you blame the controls or not depends on whether you think compensation is a good source of challenge. Crash 2 feels so much better because this question is removed, no compensation necessary. Crash now has no discernible release phase. Jumps aren't testing your finagling prowess anymore, they're getting you to prove you can release the D-pad directly over the thing you want to land on. With much of the level design ethos remaining the same between Crash 1 and 2, the same tight jumps are easier to make in terms of dexterity, so gone is any pretense of blaming the controls. Whether you believe the controls in Crash 1 were genuinely flawed or just presented a different type of challenge, the debate is removed in Crash 2, and with no debate, there's no one left to say it feels bad. You could argue till the cows come home about Crash 3's minor change, whether the aesthetic concern of momentum is more or less important than the practical usefulness of stopping on a dime like in Crash 2, but it's essentially the same debate on a smaller scale. I can see why stopping so suddenly in mid-air feels stiff to some people, and to tell you the truth, a year on, I still don't have an answer for this one. The remakes are an interesting beast because they unify the controls across all 3 games, and this is centralised around the feel of Crash 2. Crash has no attack phase, as far as I can tell, and such a small release that it could almost just be input lag from my controller to my TV. The change to Crash 1 with these new controls is drastic. Gone is the wrestling with the controller, making the cleverest platforming challenges more appreciable, and the least interesting ones stick out like a sore thumb. I think it's fair to say the remake is now the best way to play Crash 1, at the very least the save system has been fixed. It's not flawless, it's got some weird stuff going on with collision detection and platform edges, but it feels how you would expect it to feel, which is pretty high praise in a way. For the sequels, it's entirely down to graphics, and for what it's worth, I think the original versions still look pretty amazing in their own way. I must say that I found myself using the D-pad far more often than I expected to in Crash 1 Remade, given that there's now the option to use analog. It goes to show that, as strange as it might feel to control a 3D game with a D-pad, the original level design took this limitation into account and compensated for it exceptionally well, with sharp 90-degree angles and straight lines everywhere. While the controls themselves may feel unpleasant, the level design was always well matched to the controller Naughty Dog were working with back in '95. As much as I'd like to go whole hog and say pushing boundaries is all that matters, knowing your limits is important too, and it's worthy of praise no matter how many years pass. As for the original, it's perhaps one of the widest known examples of what tends to be labelled dated or bad game feel, which, digging deeper, could actually be perfectly valid game feel, but which has been married to the wrong game design. It's actually quite a hopeful thought in the end. Anything can be made to feel good to play in a vacuum, and every game design has its place. It's matching them up, that's the trick. I want to give pretty much a writing credit to Steve Swink and his game design book Game Feel. As far as I can tell, he was the first person to visualize movement in video games by applying ADSR envelopes. I've recommended it before, but it really should be required reading. The concept I went over here is all of 5 pages in a 350-page textbook. I know it's been a while, thanks for bearing with me.